All right. Cool. So, welcome Adriana and Jen. Welcome to our webinar today. I have Nancy Newell, right? Am I saying that right?
You are.
Okay, Nancy. How do I know Nancy? Well, a few weeks ago, she was working with Jenny of Fit to Speak, and I happened to be in the room, and I happened to get to watch one of these presentations, and both Jenny and I were very impressed, and we really enjoyed it. And I asked Nancy if she wanted to be on one of our webinars, and 2 weeks later, here we are. So I did get a chance to watch one of Nancy's presentations the other day on the push-up, which was, what I love is the live drawing, the pace at which she goes, the way she teaches and explains and uses analogies and acronyms. So I invited her on because I know I'll enjoy it, and that selfishly, and that everyone else will enjoy it as well. So Nancy, thank you for doing this. And if you don't mind just sharing maybe a little bit about what you do and kind of how you got here, and then the floor is yours. I'm going to be an active participant in asking questions.
Brennan, thank you so much for bringing me on board. Like he talked about, I was working with Jenny, and from there we just formed like a really good relationship, and I feel like my presentation style is definitely very unique, and I wanted her insight about it. And so that's really what led to this. And so I hope you guys, well, I know you guys will enjoy it as much as they did. And, you know, Brendan talks about, you know, what do I do? I help baseball athletes win. That's really simple, but that's really, at the end of the day, that is my main job, is to help baseball and softball players win, whether that's win the day, win the game. And I do everything in my power to help them do that. And if you want
Beautiful.
more, that's really it.
I love that. That's so simple. It's a great mission statement. So I don't know if you've seen my mission statement. My mission statement is to make physical activity the #1 prescribed drug by the year 2055, because that's the year I retire. So I love that. I help baseball athletes, softball players win the day, and winning looks like multiple different things. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And then how do we learn more about you?
And so to learn more about me, you can just go to my website. It's nancynewell.com. And then from there, if you want to email me at the end of this presentation, I will go ahead, and Brendan can go ahead and put my email address in the chat box, and we can communicate after if you want to hop on for a phone call. But I'm a true believer that you guys have information that I don't know, and I can definitely learn something and gather maybe an insight from you guys, and we can do the same. And so if you're down to build a really good relationship, I would love to spend some time and just learn about you and the problems that you are coming in contact with, and how your mind works to solve them. So my website or my email would be the two best options.
Great. All right. Well, the floor is yours. I'm going to hang out here in the background, and language and learning. Let's go.
Okay. So today I'm going to be discussing language and learning, the roadmap for cleaning up pitching mechanics. And I know that a lot of you are coaches in itself. And so today's problem is going to involve definitely a little bit of craftsmanship from you guys. And what I want to be able to promise you guys is, by the end of this 60 minutes, one, you're going to have a clear and thoughtful understanding of what posture is and how posture affects delivery in the pitching motion. Two, how good positions affect performance, and how not so good positions affect performance in a negative way. Three, you're going to have a set of analogies that you can use, and you're going to have more awareness around the language that you're using with your athletes to kind of clean up some of this posture that you may be seeing with your eyes. And so to begin today's presentation, I want to give you a scope of the landscape and what it's really going to involve today. So there's going to be 6 things that we are going to tackle today. And we're going to start the discussion by talking about posture. Then from there, we're going to talk about delivery and how delivery affects your pain or can affect pain, and then how pain is going to influence performance and what we can do as a coach to add ways to prevent that, and what language we use is, and how our language is going to affect how much our athletes actually learn. And so to start the presentation today, I really want to start by using my snow cone analogy, because training can kind of get a little complicated, and a lot of the answers to questions that you guys have is it depends. And so this is the ice cream. So the problem that we're going to solve today, I want you guys to understand that what we're going to talk about today and the solution that I'm going to provide for this problem represents the cherry on top. This is the what I'm using to solve this problem. But you have to understand that the what, or the cherry on top, is supported by this clump of ice cream here. And so that clump of ice cream really represents strength. It has to be built on a really good base of strength. And that strength ultimately sits on skill. This skill could be your pitching, delivery, or in my eyes, skill is really this. So you guys throw around this language all the time. It's technique. Without solid technique in any movement, whether it's in the gym or on the mound, we're not able to express our strength. And that's really the ice cream. And the small exercises that I'm going to show today to help fix some of this posture or aid it is going to represent the cherry on top. Now, you can use cherries, you can use jimmies, you can use syrup, whatever you would like, but you have to understand that that last piece is totally unique to the individual, and it's unique to you as a coach. So posture today, we're really going to hone in and take our magnifying glass and really look at one problem that either one, the baseball player that you're working with may be in this position, or they may experience it here and there. But let's bring awareness to it. In this position, it's called anterior tilt. Okay, so anterior tilt is really just a fancy term for meaning forward. Okay, so if you think about it, there's different parts of our body too that go through this same motion. So one of those parts of the body is scapular, or you can also have pelvic anterior tilt. Both of those mean the same thing. The motion of that is all it means is dipping forward. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer to this as the dump. Now, if you're sitting in a chair, I want you to go ahead and you can put your hands on your hips and you can just arch through your low back, and you can feel at your hips the opposite motion occurs. You'll feel that your hips tilt towards your toes, and that would be a pelvic tilt forward. When it comes to your scaps, I want to give you a really solid visual on what this looks like. Okay, so from here, this is a really good visual of what I do here. So when it comes to scapular anterior tilt, right, I'm just going to call this, you're going to see this protrusion here that happens. And so you'll see a lot of this with baseball guys here, and you'll see like there's a little dot there and there's a little dot there, which just all it's telling me is it's giving me information about where the shoulder is sitting on the rib cage. And I can already make suggestions in my mind of what I'm going to see. And so when you start to see these protrusions in the back, that's just telling me that the shoulder blade again is not sitting flush with the rib cage. Is this a completely horrible bad thing? No. This is just giving you awareness of what you're going to see. Now, when you see this, you're oftentimes it's going to be kind of sandwiched with a term that people like to say. They'll say anterior humeral glide, or the humerus is sitting or it's resting forward in the socket. And an easy way that you can do that is you just take a picture of your athlete standing from the side, and that itself will give you a lot of information. So if I were to draw a line from her elbow straight up, you can see that her elbow is actually behind her neck. Her elbow is behind her neck, and her shoulder here is rolled forward. So essentially, the humerus is just sitting more forward than it is more back. And when it comes to the pitching delivery, this is something that we want to be aware of. I know a lot of you work with athletes, so I want to show you what this looks like, more of a say in a position that you guys deal with a lot. So if you think about this, this is just like a snap down position. We've all done this. And so if you think about this, right, this is just me tilted forward. My elbow is in line with my shoulder here. And now my elbow is actually behind. So I'm just driving that same pattern. I'm just in a different position. Okay, so we want those positions to be stacked because it's going to influence movement and posture. So we've gone over that. We've gone over scapular anterior tilt and that dump and what that looks like. Now, typically, when players are in this position, this anterior tilted position, you're going to start to see certain things in a delivery, and this posture is going to impact delivery in really two ways. And so what will happen here is you have guys that may experience these two symptoms. Or elbow pain. And this is really indicative of their posture. So if you are working with a guy that has a higher arm slot and he's also sitting in anterior tilt, he's probably going to experience more of this. Now, what type of arm slot do you think people are going to experience a little bit more elbow pain with? And if you have an idea, just throw this in the chat. Do we have anything coming up, Brennan?
Adriana or Jen? I don't know if they're there. The hard part with webinars is I don't know if.
All right, no worries, no worries. So typically you're going to have guys that have a lower arm slot, or those guys that do have a lower arm slot are probably going to be more amped to have a little bit more elbow pain. And I want to show you guys what that actually looks like here. So we have flamethrower Clayton Kershaw here, and so I often get asked, Nance, how do you know their arm slot? And so it's pretty easy.
Mm,
If you take a slot from them, you can just go from their thumb down to their opposite shoulder, make that line, and that'll give you like their arm slot, and that kind of tells you where they are. All right, and so you can see that Clayton Kershaw is definitely a guy that comes up overhead a little bit more. Okay, but he's also very successful, right? And then you have old school Randy Johnson, right? And they're both at ball release. Like this is right before they're about to release the ball. So keep that in mind. So when you are drawing these, you want to make sure that you are getting it right before ball release to get a true understanding of where their arm slot is. And so Randy, if we go from his thumb to his opposite shoulder, we make that
mm.
line, that's going to give you his arm slot. So it's a lot lower. It is more of a like a sidearm slot. And so there's no right or wrong. It's very unique to each position, but you have to understand that this is really going to impact delivery, and it's also going to impact the performance that they, or it could impact pain or performance down the road. And this is something that we definitely want to address because when we think about posture, right, we talked about what anterior tilt is and what that looks like from a visual standpoint. Anterior tilt is when that gliding is occurring. It's when that elbow is sitting behind the body and that shoulder blade is pulled up, driving your upper arm or your humerus forward. And over time, that could cause maybe some anterior shoulder pain if you are a higher slot guy, or that could cause some elbow pain down the road if you're more of a lower arm slot guy.
Nancy, have they done any studies or looked at Tommy John and arm slots?
They have. I can definitely go ahead and link some of those research articles. Well, I can send them to you and they can definitely check
Yeah,
them
yeah,
out
yeah.
for sure.
Okay,
When it comes to that.
okay.
Next, building upon this, I think one thing that we have to consider is, when people are in this position, such as anterior tilt, and they start to experience this, they're going to go through this, or they're going to actually have this experience called guarding. And so,
Mm,
guarding is always going to be associated with some type of pain or nervousness to perform a movement because being hurt isn't fun, and the body does not want to be hurt again. And so they're not going to be able to be as free and loose in their delivery as what they would like to experience. And so you'll see this a lot. And so some of the common things that I'll see is, for example, bring a guy back from a hamstring tear or something like that, where getting him to run could be very emotionally hard for him to get past that barrier because he doesn't want to pull that hamstring again. Getting a guy back from Tommy John surgery, right? He may be actually ready to throw, he may be clear to throw, but actually getting over the fear of going through that pitching motion again could be really dangerous. And for example, if a guy goes ahead and he blows out his arm, with a curveball, when he's back and cleared, he may have like a huge fear of throwing a curveball because that
mhm.
curveball is the pitch that he tore it on. So that could be something that you have to overcome. And then another one would be like ACL. So we see this all the time happening. And so as a coach, we have to be able to set the environment up to help to not only overcome certain static and dynamic postures, but also static and dynamic barriers that are happening in the brain as well. And
One of my favorite
yeah,
analogies for guarding, Nancy, is it's almost like your brain throws on the e-brake in your car. So the brain says, whoa, 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 whoa. Last time we did this, we got injured. So I'm going to throw on the e-brake. And like you're saying, part of our job is to almost inoculate the person with progressions and or almost try to vaccinate them, sort of, with COVID in mind, to vaccinate them from possibly hopefully it's not going to happen again. But we have to slowly inoculate them to being okay with that movement once again, which is part of the rehab process. So, like you're saying, it's physical, but guarding happens a lot in the brain, and it's like the brain throwing on the e-brake in your car.
It really is. That's actually it's a really good analogy to use this. And that's why, going back to here, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about posture and how posture will impact certain deliveries. And when it comes to impacting that delivery, I always like to use this analogy of the rower and the boat. So I know we have Adriana on board, so I'm going to use her as my assistant here. So if Adriana and I are each in separate boats. So this is Nancy, this is Adriana. And Brendan, you're going to be here, okay?
Am
And
I swimming?
no, you're going to be here. This is land, and we're going to call
Oh, okay.
this is water here. Okay?
All
So
right.
this is our lake, and the shore is over here. Okay? And you tell us, so this analogy is going to represent fatigue. And one, the impact that pitching with pain can have on
Hmm.
you, especially your mechanics. So, for example, we've all seen this, is that over the course of innings, fatigue starts to step in. And for Clayton Kershaw, you would start to see once he starts to get tired. So Clayton was the guy with the higher arm slot. Over time, once he gets fatigued, what's going to happen to his arm slot is it's going to start to drop. It's going to start to lower. And that is starting to get out of his unique zone. So fatigue is affecting him, and that's going to affect his accuracy and his output, which we don't want. We want him to be able to stay in his zone for as long as possible and be able to repeat his delivery one after one. But when you are in poor positions, things start to happen. You start to fatigue faster. And I want to think, like, if Brendan, you were here and you said, all right, Nancy, Adriana, we're going to play a game. So if this lake is split up into miles, so we'll say this is the first mile, second, third, and fourth would be the finish line. You say, Nance, your mechanics are amazing. For every mile that you travel here, you get a bucket of water that is dumped into your boat. Okay. Adriana's technique is not the greatest. So she's actually starting with not great technique. So she's a person that's starting with poor posture and in a poor position. So every mile that Adriana travels, she gets actually 2 full buckets of water put into her boat. And so as we start on this journey to race across the lake, for each mile that I'm traveling, each inning that I participate in, there is some fatigue going into my boat. However, say both Adriana and me are both on the same strength levels. Because my technique, my efficiency, and my movement is so much better, I am fatiguing, but I'm able to sustain this a lot longer, and I'm going to make it to the other side of the lake faster. With Adriana, her technique from the get-go she's not starting in a good position. And for every inning she pitches, she's getting 2 buckets of water. And so by the time she makes it to the other side, one, she's gone a lot slower. Her performance, she's wasted a lot more energy, and she's going to be tired, and her boat is probably going to look like garbage because of that. And this is why it's so important as a coach to recognize these small things and the impact that it has on delivery. So I
So
want to go ahead.
could another word be efficiency?
Efficiency would be perfect. So efficiency, right?
So it's almost like my one of I have my analogies. as well, which I will throw in here for more food for thought, is it's almost like one you're driving the same car with the same horsepower, but one gets 10 miles a gallon and the other gets 50 miles a gallon.
And that's a great example, and you have to keep in mind too that those cars would have the same engine too,
Right, right.
because that's all something that's relatable as well. But you have to be efficient in your movement, and one of the reasons that you become more efficient is because you have really solid technique, and that technique
Yeah,
is built on the top, and upon that skill and technique, you have a good clump of ice cream, which is like your strength. And
right.
so what we've done is we've talked about posture, we've talked about the delivery, and now what we're going to do is we are going to talk about what we can do from a preventative standpoint here when it comes to tackling anterior tilt. And one of the most basic exercises that I start with is this is a prone trap raise off an inclined bench with a PVC pipe. And so what I'll do is I will play this and we'll just allow it to go and we will go ahead and make comments afterwards. So when it comes to this movement, I think that some key considerations to take note of are is is one, what are we accomplishing here? And so what we're accomplishing is first just having an understanding that the sh- the shoulder blade doesn't only do anterior tilt, it also goes through posterior tilt. And if that's kind of equal and opposite is how I think about it is if you have someone who has a lot of anterior tilt, you need to give them awareness on how this feels posterior tilt because it goes both ways. And what that drill does is it builds awareness around that. And then building upon that, right? Posterior tilt is going to allow the humerus, instead of being pushed forward in the socket, it is going to allow it to be centered a little bit more. So when we come back up to this position here, it's going to allow us to achieve a position more like this, where the humerus and the arm are all in a straight line, and we're not going to get any of this nasty grinding effect here when you look here at the second picture. And it's just going to be a cumulative effect over time. It's going to be something that you're not going to recognize that you're doing wrong right at bat, and it's going to take a long time. So you want to be able to build awareness around that. And so the next question when you think about it is, hey, how do we build awareness, Nance? How do we do that? How do we do that? And a lot of that comes down to cueing, or like the language that we use is really important. And so, you know, there's really two main homes. The first house would be internal cues, and the second house here would be external cues. When it comes to internal cues, these are cues that are referenced internally. They're thoughts about the body. So um, the body. And what are these cues good for? These cues are really good for bodybuilding,
Hmm.
right? Bodybuilding. If you're a bodybuilder and you want to go ahead and really get after it and feel a good peak in your bicep, you want to have good, they'll say like mind muscle connection with it to feel that muscle working. And internal cues have been shown to be really beneficial if you're targeting muscles like that. And then in the rehab setting, this is kind of a mixed world because once you get past a certain point in rehab, There's going to be different suggestions that go on. It's but definitely very personal, but personal, person to person preference. But um, internal cues are not bad. And then when we go to our second house over yonder, here external cues are cues that hang on here. Okay, the focus of attention is outside the body, so we're not really referencing a body a body part. And what is this good for? Really sporting movements, things that we want to be able to move fast, and we want to be able to elicit really good qualities, such as strength, power, decision making is one. All those things are really really good. And if we go back to the exercise that we were talking about, which was the chest supported PVC pipe, the next question would be, Nance, why would we use a PVC pipe? And so, why? Would it make the movement better or more efficient? And I know it seems like a very small thing, but it is like we talked about, like the cherry on top. There's going to be certain things that arise that are going to affect the movement a little bit differently. So if we go ahead, an internal cue, for example, for that exercise would be this. Would be something like this. I want you to tilt your shoulder blades back. I want you to tilt your shoulder blades back. So this is referencing, obviously, internal. But what would be an example of an external cue? An external cue. You could say something.
Raise the bar to the ceiling.
Raise the bar to the ceiling would be a great one. Yeah, raise the bar to the ceiling. Brennan, can you think of one that forces them to visualize or imagine something?
Imagine you're trying to get that bar as far as you can above your head.
Can you come up with something?
Baseballish.
Nope, not even. I would
Oh, okay.
say something that they can like see and imagine. Like what could that pipe be turned into? It's not a pipe, it's a what?
Baseball bat.
Sure. You could say that.
Okay.
And in my mind, I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was
Okay.
thinking, imagine that the PVC pipe you're holding is a wand. And with this
Okay.
wand, I want you to draw the largest arc possible. So,
Or a pencil. Yeah.
or a pencil, right? Exactly. So I think a pencil would be even better. So I want to go ahead and write this out because I think it's important for us to kind of pull some language from here. So
The way I like to think of external cues is you're using the environment to create context. So you set them up in a position with a PVC pipe, and you use the environment as the way to get what you want, as opposed to, like you say, trying to get them to posterior tilt their scapula, which is you need to have a lot of body awareness. And it's like you said, it's a very clinical thing that needs to be done most likely needs to be explained one-on-one.
Brennan, you're spot on. I think, in my own personal experience and a lot of the literature that we both have consumed is this obviously like is not bad, but it's probably not going to be effective only because there's no context. And a lot of
Yeah.
the guys that I work with they are younger and they don't know where their shoulder blades are. They don't know where their hamstrings are or their quads. And so
Hmm.
what we can do as coaches is create good visual imagery that they can relate to or even picture. And
Right.
I really want to go back to this because when we think about it is if we had two choices of saying choice number one, I want you to do this prone trap raise without the PVC pipe and only use internal cues versus having them use the PVC pipe and use some type of environment or analogy or imagery to help paint a picture, which one is going to be better? They both may achieve posterior tilt, right? You may cue a person, they may actually smash it. I may give this athlete, I say, hey, I want you to tilt your shoulder blades back. Boom, they do it. It's fantastic. I can walk away. I might give an athlete the same thing. I might put a PVC pipe in their hand, boom, posterior tilt. It's a beautiful exercise. It's what I want. But the biggest things that are missing from one than another is if I had to actually frame something and really separate out is at the end of the day, there's really something that I'm looking for as a coach. And what I'm looking for is this is retention. I know I've done a really good job as a coach if they can come back 3 days later and actually retain that movement. I don't have to keep going back and repeating myself or giving them that same feedback. And so as a coach, I think this is definitely something important that you need to know is that a motor skill, right? This is something that's happening in person live in the moment that we're trying to alter. And so this is acute, right? And so this is us trying to take someone and have them retain it. Retention is long term, and this here is short term. It's relatively flexible and not stable. It could be stable for that one session, but when they come back tomorrow, you have to cue them again to tilt their shoulder blades back. And so using internal cues could get them into a really good position. But as a coach and as a player, we're wasting time. We're wasting time because we have to keep going back and we have to keep patching up the same hole on the wall. We want to be able to go ahead and put a clean piece of spackle, sandpaper at once, paint it, and we don't even that hole's fixed. It's good. We don't have to keep going back and addressing that hole in the wall. And that's where using external cueing is going to allow for more retention because we can hold on to it and we can like paint a picture. And I want to challenge you as a coach to make sure that everything you say has this. Everything you say has this. If your exercises don't have an intent or a goal, they're not effective. They're not going to be efficient. Number one, because your athlete has no reference if they're doing it correctly. Number two, they're not actually going to have the ability to actually retain it because it's not going to be sticky. Now, when you think about this doesn't have an intent or really, all we're saying here is, I want you to tilt your shoulder blades back, but there's no reference in what that actually feels like or looks like for them. And so they're kind of just going through the motion. The only feedback that they're getting is from us. They will perform that movement sometimes while they're performing it, and they'll look to us for approval. If we nod our head, they're going to continue to do that. If we give them the feedback of no, we have to keep going back over there. But here, if we break this down, raise the bar to the ceiling. What is our intent? We want to raise. What is the goal? The bar to the ceiling. So this would be an A, right? If we were to give this, imagine you are holding a wand and your goal is to draw. I would actually say this going back. I'd probably place, I'd say here, I'd say, I want you to imagine you're holding a wand and your goal is to draw a beautiful, like the most beautiful, biggest arch possible. Because now, because you added the word beautiful, you are aiding into intent, right? If you change that word beautiful to like an aggressive, a fast arc, something like along those lines, you alter intent. But beauty is associated with elegance, and this movement that we're doing is a movement that's going to be slower in nature. So you want to surround it and frame it with words that resemble that. And what is the goal? The goal is to draw the biggest arch possible. That is a sticky cue, and that's going to be something that they're going to be able to retain over the long haul. And so, for example, they come in to see me day one, and I have to give them this cue. And then day two, I see that they're messing up, but I don't have to say anything to them. I just take my pen, I go like this. They know it's a wand. And from across the gym, I have fixed that movement. So now I can help other athletes because they remembered that. And I'll look over and it's going to be pretty crispy. And then day three, they know it. And the ability for them to actually retain this movement is going to be very, very strong. And as a coach, that's something that we're looking for is efficiency and our ability to work with as many athletes as possible. But we want to make sure that at the end of the day, they are walking away learning something and being able to retain it and be independent. And so with that in mind, I just want to go back through. So we've talked about language, right? We just finished talking about the different language and how we can use it to frame, whether we're using internal or external cues. And when it comes to learning, the biggest thing that we need to focus on is painting really good pictures for our athletes to be able to grab on and to hold. And that's the biggest piece of information that I want you guys to be able to take away from today is to tackle that. Brendan, I want to reach out to you and ask if we have any questions.
I do not have any questions. I will say with the cueing stuff, I love the example that you used here of using an adjective like beautiful, depending upon the context of the exercise or what you're looking for. So for example, like it's something slower or elegant or something that's not a dynamic movement, right? Because if you said draw the biggest arch possible quickly, they would go as fast as they can and they wouldn't get what the intent of the exercise is. But if you're doing something like sprinting, which you and I are both fans of Nick Winkelman, you want to stab the ground behind you. You want to punch the ground behind you because it's a violent, dynamic movement. You wouldn't want to lightly press your foot into the ground because that would not be sprinting. So I love because now you're taking external cues and you're going even further. This is, like you're saying, the cherry on top. Because my example of raising the bar to the ceiling, it's an external cue and it gets the job done, but to draw the biggest arch possible beautifully, now you're going the extra mile. So maybe it's just a reminder to myself out loud that I need to go deeper with my external cues and my adjectives and my specifics, because like you said, the word beautiful or the word wand or pencil is a much more memorable or an easier external cue to retain compared to just raise the bar to the ceiling. Although it is external, it's not the same as going as deep as you went. So I think that's my big takeaway from that.
So I have two things off of that. So first off, great point. And I'm thinking of there's deepness, like you said, to the language that we use, and it really comes down to quality. It's like if you go to McDonald's, it is a hamburger. Like, is it a memorable hamburger? No. If you go to something up a little bit more, you go to a classier restaurant, um, that burger may be a tad bit more memorable. But for me personally, I'm gonna say it would be having my godfather make his like class A hamburgers. It's like he goes the extra mile. Like, they're handmade. He toasts the buns, got the cheese on it. Like, that to me is a memorable moment. But it's also it's shaped because it's also in his backyard, and is that there's music playing in the background, and everything is adding to that atmosphere, and it's something I will always remember. But at the end of the day, it's a hamburger, you know. But going back to the arc shape that you were talking about and using different adjectives to kind of wrap this, it's like the next thing that came to my mind was a reverse med ball toss, where very arcish in nature, like you're trying to create the biggest arch as possible to throw that med ball as far as possible. And to relate that, a visual that you could paint in their mind is, you are a race car driver and your goal is to go from 0 to 100 as fast as possible. Like, you're on the line, you're ready to go. With this med ball, I want you to treat this as you shifting through those gears to get to 100 as fast as possible. Now, you want to take that med ball and get from gear 1 to gear 5 as fast as possible, creating that fast arc. And you want to throw that med ball as far as possible for distance, obviously. But there's the way that you frame language and use language is so important, because the outputs that you get are tremendous. And then you don't have to spend as much time going back and working on mundane things, that if you were to take the time to pause and really go deep with what you're about to say to them, you would save so much more time. And I think, honestly, athletes really value that. Athletes really know when you've gone the extra mile to communicate with them, because they hear everything. If you're working with 5 different athletes and they hear you give the same exact cue to all 5 of them, that's not individualized, and that's not personalized, and that's also that is not developing a deep connection with them to ultimately, at the end of the day, to build this. Because athletes want to know that you know about their history and you know about what their goals are. And it's like, we need to do a better job of taking the time to actually, write out what we would say to athletes in a certain situation to elicit a certain movement that we want based upon different backgrounds. It's one of the coolest things that you can do as a coach. And I think I always praise other coaches when I hear unique cues or analogies to describe something, and they stand out, and like, you remember them because they're so different.
Right, and it would be so easy for you to just say accelerate the med ball as far as possible, accelerate. But the imagery of a race car going from 0 to 100 and shifting gears, and that's a much better way to visualize, but also get what you want out of the drill or the athlete than saying accelerate.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You can take any movement that you do and really focus on that. But
yeah, and like you said, it's important too to tailor it. This is like the art of coaching, is what we're speaking to now, more than the X's and O's, is the ability to tailor that message to the individual or athlete. So a baseball player, right? How do we you might have a different way of describing. I like to use the slide board as an example. I use slide board for conditioning a lot, and I can get you in a slide board position and say it's like you're stealing a base. It's like you're pushing off the mound. It's like you're changing directions in a football game. It's like you're playing defense on basketball. It's like skating in hockey. It's the same exercise. I'm just tailoring it to whatever the individual is accustomed to or has seen before. And then hopefully, as you're saying, the retention stays, and then it's easily carried over into said sport without having to think about what they're pushing with, and that it just happens naturally because they're so accustomed to that position. But also, if they get into a situation where they know they need to accelerate, maybe that imagery of the race car pops into their mind on the field or in the sport or on the play or whatever it is. So as you can tell, I'm a big fan of external cues, and I'll shut up now.
Brendan, I just appreciate your thoughts. So they're always very welcome at any time.
Thank you for listening to me. Floor is yours.
Brendan, what questions do we have in the chat?
We don't have any questions right now. It was just Jen Chia saying she has to go to our client and that she'll watch this later. And I'm looking on Facebook Live right now and I don't see any questions. But I mean, I have lots of questions, but you can continue and I've been writing my stuff down selfishly.
All right, so I will go ahead. I will end with this. This is a question that I get a lot from people who view these presentations, especially this one is they ask, Nance, where can I learn more about the impact of cueing? And if I had to name one person to really dive into this, it would be definitely Gabrielle Wolf has done a lot of research on this and she's been phenomenal. And then two, like Brendan talked about, Nick Winkelman. He has a really good presentation that he did back. I think it was for the NSCA. It's on YouTube. I think it's What We Say Matters.
Mm-hmm.
And yep. I would highly, highly recommend to watch that. But not only like watch that, take it and then practice with it. And so this is something that is important. So this is really what makes good coaches into great coaches and great coaches into extraordinary coaches. Is quality of your message is a function of how much knowledge you have, how much you practice with that knowledge, and how much talent you have. That's really what it comes down to. Is there's a lot of gifted people out there, but they don't spend enough time growing their craft. And then you also have people who spend way too much time, focusing on the knowledge piece of it and not actually putting themselves in positions to practice this. And so the size of the letters dictates the importance or the rank. So I'm gonna go in this order. You have to have knowledge about your craft and what you're doing and what's expected. And then how do you practice with this knowledge and how do you practice it on a daily basis? And then how do you go ahead and challenge yourself to accomplish certain tasks that you've kind of put in place to measure if you're actually getting better as a coach? And then talent to me is being your authentic self and coaching the way you coach in your style. And for example, it's just, yeah, being true to who you are. Like, I think the biggest thing for me too is like, this presentation style is very unique because it's something that I really enjoy doing. Do I see many people do this? No, definitely not. But it's very unique to me, and it's what makes sense in my mind. And I, I think more coaches need to be able to embrace that, because when coaches go off and veer into who they really are and how they interpret and think about information, it will lead to different roadmaps of people, and will be able to help way more people than just continually to serve the same type of people all the time. But this is everything. This is awesome. But
Yeah.
um
I just took a picture of that. I'm taking it. It's mine now. No, I'm kidding.
it's yours.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the presentation style, the flow and speed at which you go at makes this all very easily digestible, and you're a wonderful teacher. So please keep teaching. We need more great teachers out there.
Brendan, thank you. Too kind.
Yeah, if you don't mind, do you mind scrolling back to the top with your like little checklist? So with the preventative, when did we talk about preventative? Or it's just checking all these boxes lead to prevention or injury reduction?
Yeah, it's a great question. So prevention is going to be down here in this step, which really comes down to building our base of strength. And so preventative is going to be the ice cream that we talked about, this clump of ice cream with the cherry on top. So here, like, this is our technique.
Yep.
Which has to be established from the get-go. And then you have, your strength up here. And then these here, the cherry on top represents what we talked about, which is the what that we're using, not necessarily the how. I would say, honestly, to build upon this ice cream analogy, how you eat the ice cream is also very important to how much you're going to enjoy it. If you take a long time to eat this ice cream, it's going to start to melt, and then things are going to start to fall off, and it's going to get really sloppy because you're not being efficient with your time. If you take the ice cream and you dump it into a bowl, now it's like you have a completely different movement. Now you're emphasizing a lot more strength, because the strength piece is going to kind of fall out, and you're kind of letting technique be its own thing. They're not working together in itself. And so, prevention, getting our athletes to stay out of this movement, is going to be a lot of technique built upon good strength, and then choosing the correct exercises that are going to accommodate it.
Got it. Do you mind sharing, and you don't have to bring up videos unless you want to, other exercises to help with posterior tilt of the scapula, like the shoulder raise or the low trap raise? I know that, for example, in a dumbbell row, you want to cue in a dumbbell row to, I always tell people to bring their wrist to the bottom of their ribs, because that keeps the shoulder blade or the shoulder from anteriorly moving forward, hopefully. So coaching cues in certain exercises can do it, but do you have certain exercises to help other than the prone trap raise to help people with awareness in the scapula?
I do. If you give me 2 minutes here, I need to go ahead and pull up some that come to mind.
Yeah, works for me. Do you have extra time? I could sit here and talk all day. I don't have a client till 11, so.
Whoa, till 11, right? Okay.
No, it's 10 right now. I got a whole hour.
Okay.
But I don't want to, if you have other stuff going on, it's all good. I'm curious if you got some favorites.
I do. I do. Um, so let me. This would be a great time for anyone to just go ahead and have a little coffee break.
Yeah, like me.
Like you? Yeah. Hmm. All right, so I don't have it on or in my cloud, but what I do have is just a tiny example that I use for like my younger guys that are just trying to build some awareness here. I can definitely share the one that I'm thinking about in my head
Yeah.
with you guys. Let me go ahead. Let me share my screen here.
By the way, Adriana said, I love the analogy with the boat. Real life, I would beat you on the boat race, but this was great.
She's ridiculous. Okay, so even for something as simple as this is just, if you think about this, this is just a prone trap raise on the ground. This is the most basic one. And I've placed, all I've said to them was, I want you to go ahead and lift your arm up and over the dumbbell. So mind you, like these are very little nuggets, but they're performing a trap raise perfectly because there's a goal intended behind it. And from there, it's just, they're just learning. And that's really it. But even small movements like that will have some type of external cue associated with them because I think it's very important. And for little kids too, you're not going to get a lot of bang for your buck trying to describe something that they literally have no context to build from.
So you set up your environment for them to have a better chance to succeed by using the dumbbell, correct? And you could then use the same analogy you used for the PVC pipe is to, if you have a wand in your hand or a pencil, draw the biggest arch that you can over the dumbbell. Now, the other thing you could use too is a yoga block, right? Because then you have 3 different heights. Or is more necessarily not better in that drill?
It's really up to the coach. You have to look at the movement that you're assessing. And if, my question would be, are you getting posterior tilt? Yes.
Right.
Check. Okay. Now, do you want more of that movement? Like, would going higher give them more posterior tilt, or would we start to be forcing ourselves to compensate maybe through our lower back or something? But I think,
or are you in Cirque du Soleil and you actually need to have that much range of motion? Maybe.
Yeah, mine was just more of a precision and a feel. And the analogy that I was using there was, just imagine that we have a stack of quarters on the right side of the dumbbell, and you're picking up a quarter and then gently placing it down on the other side and then going back to those quarters and just stacking them up. If I wanted to progress that, I would probably progress it to a position where they would have to work on a little bit more stability. So whether that would be them holding a plank and doing that same
Mm-hmm.
thing, because
Mm-hmm.
now we've added a little bit of a challenge there. And but I probably wouldn't weight it or anything like that. I want them to be able to create awareness with it.
Got it. Got
Yeah,
it. And you're going to get your true strength or loading from an exercise
exactly.
that involves posterior tilt that they are now aware of, or the positioning of their shoulder
Exactly. I'm actually
that will.
trying to go ahead and find this video for you.
Okay.
But in the meantime, do you have, or what other questions do we have?
Um, so I just to clarify, if you're in anterior tilt and you don't have the ability to posteriorly tilt, and you have a high arm slot, you're most likely, not most likely, but it could possibly lead to anterior shoulder pain. And if you have a lower arm slot, it could lead to possible elbow pain, or that might be the culprit, is the anterior tilt of the shoulder. Now, I don't like using the word fix, but do you see a huge change in the postural, the way those scapulas sit on the shoulder? Like you showed the two dots, right? You can see I have it myself. I have the two dots as well in the scapula that you can see on my back because they're so anterior tilted. You're not saying that you're all of a sudden going to fix them and it's going to be flat, right? You're just trying to create awareness. You're almost swinging a pendulum so far the other way by using drills like the PVC pipe and showing them okay, so like you're really good at anterior tilt. Now we need to make you aware or get you at least adequate at being able to also posteriorly tilt, so that that anterior shoulder and elbow don't have to pick up the slack. Or have you seen people with that anterior tilt be able to go flat? Or is it just, it basically stays like that all the time because that's their resting posture and it's part of their sport?
So what you're asking is
Yep.
one, those people who are in anterior tilt,
Yep.
Can they understand or build awareness to get out of anterior tilt?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you have your resting posture, which is something that's static, like
Correct.
this, which is not going to always indicate what you're going to see on the mound or in the weight room, because this is just a very dynamic posture. We're not really, there's no skill going on right now. I'm just relaxing passively. But do I have the ability to get to that position? Do I have access to that door? Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing with training and adding in certain drills like that is we're allowing our athletes to have access to opening that door, because if we never give them access to open that door, they're really limited in their performance, because in order to pitch, you need to have posterior tilt of the shoulder blade to allow you to gain access to, say, like ER.
Yes.
And you
To that
yes
to that whip, in order to create that whipping motion that increases velocity.
Yes, we're giving them access to doors they didn't have access to before, which is what we want. Like in your house, if you only had one door to escape and there was a fire, you'd be very limited on your chances for survival. If you're in a house that has 3 or 4 doors to open and you also have windows, your chance of survival is dramatically higher because you have those windows of opportunity. And when you train a certain way for when you train a certain way, when you stay in a certain position long enough, your body starts to close doors because it's saying, hey, I don't ever go out that back door, I don't need it, so it shuts it off and then shuts it
Right.
off. You want, as an athlete, right, as an athlete, to be very adaptable and be able to
Hmm.
solve as many problems as possible, no matter what room that you're in. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. So the in the training world, in the strength and
Yeah.
conditioning world, they call this movement variability. And if I have more options than you have, or I am able to get into more positions or better positions, I have a higher chance of success, but also a better chance of not being injured because I have access to more options and more positions. Um, so instead of me breaking my ankle, if I step off a curb, maybe I just sprain my ankle. Instead of throwing out my shoulder, maybe my arm just gets tired, right? Because if this is my shoulder range of motion and now I'm going to start pitching, something's going to have to pick up the slack there. It's like you're saying, you're creating more windows of opportunity by giving them more positions. And the reason why I brought this up is because the media, and there are some trainers and fitness professionals out there who claim that you can change static posture. Now, you brought up the long term, right? So if you do this stuff over a long period of time, so yes, there will be some remodeling of tissues, but to think that you're going to take someone from anterior tilt of the shoulder and do a bunch of prone raises with a PVC pipe and magically their scapulas are going to sit differently, it's not what you're saying. What you're saying is that you are giving them more windows of opportunity, making them aware that, hey, there's also another way to move your scapulas, and you're just giving them more movement options. You're not necessarily trying to change their static posture, or nor is a certain static posture perfect, right? Because there's this idea of like, this is perfect, right? This is perfect posture right here. And there is no, I mean, posture is dynamic. So that's why I wanted to hear your thoughts on it, because I think it's important for people to hear that you're not going to do a couple prone trap raises and magically fix, right, fix their shoulder blades.
Exactly. And we have, as a coach, there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. You know, if you take a say a teenager, they're 16, they're 6'4", 155 pounds. Like, you can get a good visual representation on what they look like. They're long, lanky. Um, their static posture is probably more towards here.
Mm-hmm.
I would ask myself, would this person benefit from, one, putting on more size? Yes. If we put on more, like, say, mass to this guy, and by mass, I mean getting them stronger, obviously, and then
Mm-hmm.
his weight increases, you could see like slight changes in body position for sure. But that's over a long haul. And there's a lot of different things to consider too. Like, is this a kid who is playing in Florida and he's playing year round, and the number of repetitions that he's doing is outweighing the number of times that he's in the gym? You know, we are really just, it's all about managing workload, and keep checking in with them too to make sure that they're not in pain or anything like that. But I'd say my biggest, job as a coach is like we talked about, winning. Like, I want to make sure that they're on the field, and they're winning, and that they have really, they're technically sound in the gym. And I'm not going to put all my eggs in the arm care bucket necessarily. Like, I want to build very
Mm-hmm.
robust and strong athletes. And you hinted upon this earlier about variability and, you know, how much we need it. I think variability needs to be introduced once we've earned the right to have some variability. So if you take a squat, for example, uh, there's there's probably 50 variations of a squat. There's a lot of different squat variations that you can do. You know, it's. But first, I want to make sure that my athlete is mastering, say, a dumbbell goblet face the wall squat. So after they've mastered that, and I've set a standard too, like, hey,
Mhm.
when you have taken this squat variation and you can dumbbell goblet squat 80 pounds for 3 sets of 10 to something that I think is technically sound, and we were going to move on to this. And
Right.
then from there, it would be like a dumbbell goblet squat, you know, with a pause. And you can do, you know, what's called like differential learning. You could say, all right, your first set, I want you to squat with a narrow stance. Your second set, we're gonna go to a wide stance. And then your third set, we're gonna bring it into more of a medium stance. And so you are adding variability in there, but it's still the same
Mhm.
movement. It's as if with a pit or with a hitter in the box, you know, you need to be able to hit from the back of the box, from the
Mhm.
front of the box, close to the plate, away from the plate. Your swing is still your swing. And so when it comes to variability, you need to also use your eyes and think, what is the outcome? Is the outcome the same? Because we do want the outcome to be the same, no matter
Mm.
what. The
Right.
path that you get there is going to vary, but the outcome we want the same. As a pitcher, each pitcher, their arm path that they take to deliver the ball is going to be slightly different, but
Mhm.
the outcome is accuracy, velocity, did they get a strike? Like, did they do their job? When it comes to a
Yep.
squat, what things were perfect in that squat? One, did they stand up with it? How technically sound was it? We want that to stay the same. And if you add too much variability in there, the outcome of that movement changes. And now that's a good sign for you as a coach that maybe you've added too much variability into that movement, you know? So you just, at the end of the day, it's like you just have to do progressive overload. You have to be
Right.
aware and understand it and just master the basics.
Right. So foundation first earns you the right to add variables. Um, I like to use the analogy of MMA or martial arts. Right. Everybody comes in as a white belt. Just because you're big, strong, 6'4", you don't get to start. Like, it's not like, hey, welcome to class. Like, you look like a blue belt, you look like an orange belt, you look like a black belt. Oh, you're a white belt for sure. Like, it's everybody starts as a white belt and you work your way to the black belt. And I see it in fitness. Too many people assume that, oh, you're a black belt. Here you go. Here's a barbell. Put it over your head. We're going barbell squats today. It's your first day. Welcome to the gym. And you didn't start it, like you're saying, as a white belt and work your way up to the black belt. That's one of the analogies that I love to use. And speaking of analogies, Nick Winkleman must have known we were speaking about him because he's on right now. Hi, Nick. Nick, we gave you lots of praise about 5 minutes before you came on. Um, okay, so the way I want to end this, again, another selfish question, is there's the idea of overhead athletes. And for me, anyone under the age of 16, for me, is just an athlete. They're not a baseball pitcher. They're not a football player. They're just a kid. They're an athlete. But at the age of 16 or 17, when you start to specialize, what is your take on things like overhead press, barbell and dumbbell snatches? So the overhead athlete, which most would categorize as volleyball, pitching, baseball, and swimming, I guess, kind of, sort of. Do you, at some point, cut out things like pressing, snatches, due to the risk of injuring the shoulder possibly. I'll use you work with somebody who's in Major League Baseball and their arm's worth $50 million, right? You don't want that on your resume that I hurt X who now can't pitch and is on the DL for the next 60 days because we did dumbbell snatches. That's always going to fall upon the strength coach. Well, I guess I have two questions. Do you believe in that? Do you do that? And do you do it because your job dictates that if you were to do stuff like that, you might lose your job? Or do you really think that it's not worth the risk for the reward of doing overhead exercises? So I guess, is it political, or do you think there is a true justification physically to not mess up the arm mechanics or to go overhead with certain exercises? And is there a certain age?
Okay, so you're asking basically if one, overhead athletes should be doing overhead movements, and then two, is it safe or is it dangerous, and my philosophy on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't like categorizing movements as necessarily bad or good. That's like my first thing. I think it really comes down to one, I'm looking at the sport first and foremost. I'm looking to see, what is required by them. If they're required in sport to be overhead, then our body, we need to make sure that in my model, I'm doing overhead work because they're spending a lot of time there and I want them to be strong in that position. I think that's something that's important. But again, there's this concept of minimal effective dose where it really comes down to, I think, managing volume of the time spent overhead. I think, using your eyes, we talked about this, of, how they're getting there. But I think for me, it is a movement that I feel like is important too. And I would talk with the athlete as well and discuss this. Like, if an athlete doesn't, if they have that fear, if they read something, and they feel like it's not going to be valuable to them, asking them, hey, what do you think is really valuable? I think John Kiley talks about this all the time, is the best program that's going to work is the one that the athlete really believes in. And you have some athletes who, like, for example, like bench pressing is like a big thing. Like, should our baseball players bench press? And, it's, for every negative story you find on bench pressing, you'll find the same amount of positive ones. And I think it's just our role, like my job as a coach, is to just be in tune with my athletes and make a judgment call. Like, I've spent plenty of time in this game to look at an athlete and, have that movement earned into their program. Yes, but you also have to earn a squat. You also have to earn more difficult variations of lunges, or you could say really, really any movement. But as a coach, I think layering your program to always have success. So by the time you implement an overhead movement, they've built up a really good capacity to do that, and so that's where my take is on it. It's not really a direct.
Yeah, you're saying it depends, but you are not afraid of it. You will do it because, like you're saying, they get in those positions, but at some point there is right, how strong is strong enough? What's the minimal effective dose that we can?
How about this? I think a better question is, Nance, when would you not take a guy overhead?
Okay, let's do that. Nance, when would you not take a guy overhead?
I would not take a guy overhead if he's limited in shoulder flexion. That's a big one.
Okay. Okay.
Or if this guy has a if he has a if he came to me with a poor understanding of, well, if he's in like a gross extension pattern, he's probably going to lack the ability to get to that overhead position in a safe
Hmm.
manner. But going back to what we were
Hmm.
talking about, right, painting a picture and cueing and building context is after a week with me and he understands that position and he's got full shoulder flexion, boom, he's good, fantastic. But we also need to understand that sure, he can't go overhead, but maybe we can progress our way there, and starting with more of like an isometric standpoint. So if a guy is lacking in shoulder flexion, maybe you bring him up to 90 degrees and you work on something isometrically. You're holding like maybe a carry in
Hmm.
static position first. Now let's see if
Hmm.
he can hold this carry position while he's moving. Now it's an unstable position. Now we progress maybe to a landmine press. Like there's multiple ways to it, but
Hmm.
I would not overhead press a guy who is coming off like some type of cuff surgery, or he's very sufficient in shoulder flexion, or if he has like a gross extension pattern, most likely because the way that he's going to get to that top of the movement is probably going to be poor, but
Hmm.
if all those other boxes are checked and you feel like it's going to add value to them and they need to get stronger and more stable in that position, then yes, holding something overhead is not going to be the limiting factor on whether this guy gets hurt or not,
Right. It's not like you're throwing a 30-pound kettlebell.
No,
You're just moving through a certain range of motion that you own the mobility and stability, but you might not have the capacity or the strength yet. But that's our job to help them with.
exactly. Exactly.
But if they don't have the mobility and stability, then you're not going to load that pattern.
I'm not going to load that pattern, or I would load it lightly and see what happens. So, for example, if you take a squat, for example, like people use like the overhead squat, PVC pipe. It's
Yeah.
like load
Yeah.
load actually helps that movement. If you were to give
Right.
them a PVC pipe and have them squat versus a 10 or 25-pound counterbalance, load helped them gain awareness and stability for that position. And the same thing I
Right.
think can be said for overhead as well, where it's like you don't have to be standing on your feet to go overhead. Like an inchworm allows an athlete to get overhead just in a
Right.
different way. And so
Right.
you can really trick the body into doing it against gravity, with gravity, in a dynamic fashion, isometrically. It's how you get there, and it's really comes down to, if I have an athlete scared to do that, you can, and you want to test and really see if it's more of a mental thing in that position, or if they really do feel pain in that position. You can
Hmm.
get to that overhead position on the ground. You can get to that overhead position half kneeling. You can get to that
Right.
position standing, stable and unstable. Um, it's just being able to look at the same picture through, like, standing in different corners of the room, standing in different light, and
Yeah.
going from there.
I love going floor slides to downward dog to inchworm, because you're going overhead just in an in a roundabout kind of way, right? You're using gravity to your benefit, because gravity is external load. It doesn't have to be weight. Okay, well, I have about 35 other questions now, which that just means we're going to have you on again. Um,
That
thank you
works for
for
me.
today. I appreciate you coming on and spending the extra half hour answering my questions. Hopefully other people learned a lot from this as well. This will be available for viewing later on. What's the best way for people to contact you? Well, we talked about that in the beginning. What is your email?
So my email is Nancy Newell 02 at gmail.com.
Okay.
And so you can just reach out to me there if you have any questions at all, or you can listen on to various webinars that I have done or podcasts that I've done with other researchers on my website. And those are going to be the two main options for you guys to